landlord, everything is in here. When you're taking a lease listing or just filling out a lease, an application, we're gonna cover it all. We're gonna talk about the do's and don'ts and handle money and those things, and then our company policy and procedures. So what to expect? There's 16 pages to a lease. There's a pet agreement, there's an inventory condition form. You're gonna have lots of questions when it comes to leases. People who are needing to lease have either bad credit, they have credit issues, they don't have a lot of money. So knowing the inventory and knowing the market's going to be crucial in helping them. Sometimes our listing inventory is really low and some landlords are really picky. And so unfortunately, it's sometimes a very daunting task to try to find somebody a lease. So knowing the market's going to be key. And then knowing your representation. Buyer, it's required to have buyer tenant representation agreement. So that way they clearly know who represents who. And then the IABS form, and we're going to cover all of those as well. There's a lot of supplemental paperwork. In addition to the contract and addenda that we have, there's the application process, there's a screening process. We want to make sure you guys understand that you guys don't do the screening ever, right? That's a big no-no. And then sometimes we can also do a lease guarantee for people and have family members do a guarantee for them or co-sign for them, especially if they're younger, right? First time ever renting something, they're going to need help and assistance. And so we're going to walk through how that process will help as well. So when you begin working with a tenant, it's really helpful if you put a package together and have everything ready for them. And in your welcome package should be your IABS, your buyer tenant rep agreement, and the lease application. The IABS and buyer tenant rep agreement is something that you'll need to upload into your command once you get your lease done with them. It also helps them understand representation. And then of course, the lease application. When we go through a lease application, and we're going to go through one of the helpful tips you want to make note of is at the very top of a lease application, there's an address that goes in there, and I suggest leaving that blank. And when you meet your folks and give them the lease application, make a bunch of copies. This way, they only have to fill out the application one time. It's a lengthy document. And unfortunately, it's very common that they're going to have to apply multiple times to get into a lease. So it's really inconvenient if they're having to apply 3 or 4 times to redo this application 3 or 4 times. So as a good customer service, don't fill in the address, leave it blank, and just make multiple copies for them. In qualifying for the tenant, as a realtor, you are not able to do that. It's out of your scope and expertise to actually, run their credit check and check the consumer out for the landlord. That is not something that you guys need to get involved in, or you should get involved in. TREC doesn't want you getting involved in that. And so I'm going to show you a program called mysmartmove.com. that when you're the listing agent, you're going to educate the landlord in using, and as the representative of the tenant, you're going to educate them on how it works, because most landlords, most listing agents do use it. It's highly recommended by TREC and TA and Texas Realtors. And so it's a program designed for us just for qualifying a candidate and doing all kinds of checks. And I'm going to show you how all of that works. When the tenant is rejected, we have an adverse action notice and credit score disclosure. We're going to go through that. And this is going to be very helpful, especially when you're the listing agent, or for you to request when you're representing the tenant to get one of these, because it'll put on there, it'll show on there why the tenant was rejected. And of course, as a reminder, we do not do property management. You have to refer that out. So as a listing agent, you in no circumstances should be handling the management of the property, the management of this lease in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, once a lease is executed, we're done. Once a lease is executed via condios, everything is between the landlord and tenant after that, and any disputes or conflicts, they have to seek an attorney. So let's go check out My Smart Move. MySmartMove.com is free. There is a cost to do all of the credit checks and all of those things, but it's your landlord sets up who pays that. And so typically it's customary that the tenant will pay for that. So MySmartMove.com will give the landlord a sense of, will this tenant pay on time? Is the renter a risk? Do they need to worry about safety? And is it the right tenant for the landlord? So he's going to set up the questions, the profile. He's going to set up and dictate what the buyer will pay for in order for him to make a decision. It does many, many reports. The common ones that a landlord would want is the tenant credit report, the tenant criminal report, a tenant eviction report, and the income insights report. The income insights report is really helpful because it gives an estimate of what their income should be. And then you could tell whether they reported it too low or reported it too high. And of course, the eviction report looks at past evictions to see, okay, they've been a good tenant to somebody else before, they haven't, right? And so whether we want to take a risk on these people or not. It offers a complete screening package with background checks, criminal background checks, and the seller can pick an actual bundle of what he wants. Isn't this great? He can pick a $25 bundle, a $38 or $40. He could set up, he will pay for it, or the tenant will pay for it. And then the great thing about all this too is the tenant will get a copy. So it really it's really affordable application processing fee. I mean, we see so many that charge $75 and you don't even know what they're charging for. But as a listing agent, this is a great, great tool to have your landlord set up. Very affordable, and it just does everything that the landlord is going to need to make a really good decision on a candidate. And the best part of it is it takes you totally out of it, right? You are totally arm's distance length, and you're providing a great service to the landlord, and it's actually a good service for the tenant as well. So in this slide, it just says who can pay for it. The landlord sets it up, and he can decide who he wants to pay for it. And like I said, customarily, it is the tenant that will pay for this. Let's talk about the residential lease. There are some basic forms that are going to be part of the lease. There's the lease, there's an inventory condition form, there'll be a pet agreement, there'll be an addendum for lead-based paint, there's a pool spa addendum, there's intermediary, there's the agreement between brokers for residential leases. So these are going to be the typical and standard that go along with the lease. And of course, there'll be exceptions, but we're going to go through all of them. I wanted to go through first some major company policies that we have is to collect first month's rent and security deposit and a cashier's check. Why would we want a cashier's check versus a personal check?
Guaranteed funds.
Yep, guaranteed funds. Personal checks take a long time to clear, 7 to 10 days. And so from 7 to 10, if that's the case, 7 to 10 days, nobody could do anything, right? And if we're in a time crunch, you know, it's really not a good business practice. And so we won't accept personal check. A money order will be acceptable as well. But money orders sometimes only go up to, I think, either 700 for some banks or 1,000. So if you're doing a deposit that's $2,500, they might have to get 2, 3, 4 money orders to cover the one amount, right? So it's really not as efficient. So really, if they're going to the bank to get a money order, you might as well get the cashier's check. Yeah. And because they're like cash as well, right? So just know, rule of thumb, I'm working with leases, cashier's check is, and that's, you know, if you're selling property too, right? We always say cashier's check, right? For deposit your earnest money when we're purchasing. So cashier's check is just the preferred route in real estate, in anything that you do real estate. Tenant screening and property management is outsourced. So those are our two company policies. We want cashier's check for all monies that are involved in this situation, and tenant screening and property management is outsourced, period. Here's the policies and procedures. 2 cashier's checks received by the listing agent due upon execution of the lease. Most people don't understand that. They think they start collecting checks when the tenant moves in. No. When you guys execute a lease, just like a contract, 1 to 4 family, as soon as everybody signs and it's executed, that's when money needs to be handed over. And there should be 2 checks. One is your security deposit made payable to the landlord or the property owner. And the other is the first month's rent payable to the listing brokerage. If we're the listing brokerage, it gets payable to Keller Williams Premier Realty. That check is what's used to pay all the brokerages, the leasing and the listing company. So if your rent is $2,500, guess what? They're going to cut 2 checks, $2,500 to the landlord, $2,500 to Keller Williams Premier, and then Keller Williams Premier will pay the leasing agent and you their fees. And when is that due? On execution of the contract. Exceptions for first month's rent and or prorated rent can be made with the agreement of the landlord and tenant, but such practice is not in the best interest of the landlord, whose property may have been removed from active status on the MLS. So you can make an exception where you don't ask for the money right away, or you accept a personal check, but those will all be at risk. And that's why we have a company policy of not to do those exceptions. We've had more problems with exceptions than not. If prorated rent is involved, it should be included in the cashier's check made payable to the landlord, along with the security deposit, rather than in the cashier's check for the first month's rent. Both the security deposit and any prorated rent belong to the landlord and the property owner. So what's prorated rent? That means the tenant moves in mid-month and not starting on a first. So it's a situation where they move in on, instead of June 1st, they're moving in on June 15th. So we have a short month. So that's not enough to cover all the brokerage fees, right? So that's a prorated amount. So that amount plus the security deposit needs to be cut to the landlord in one check, given to him upon execution. And they're also going to cut a full month's check payable to the brokerage at execution. So still 2 checks, but the security deposit check includes the prorated amount. In the event a personal check is received, yes, Mona. Mhm. So if a tenant is not moving in on the 1st, they're moving in mid-month or a few days, even 2, 3 days, it's a shorter month, right? So 3 amounts have to be taken care of, or paid at time of execution. One is the prorated amount for however many short days are there, plus a security deposit. Those two can be added together as one lump sum payable to the landlord. And then the third amount is your security deposit, which full month's rent, which needs to be entirely for the full month's rent.
You can also pay it to the, you can do 3 checks instead of 2 checks. You can do either or, right? With my situation, because they pay the deposit and for the, 2 check and then.
So everything has to be paid upon execution. So if you pay 3 checks, I mean, it's just wasting a check or a cashier's check. You can do that. But the point is, at the time of execution, the landlord is going to be paid his security deposit and the prorated rent right at the same time. If you want to cut 2 checks for that amount, that's fine. But the point is, he's getting it upon execution of this lease, and it goes to him. And the brokerage still must get a full month's check upon execution.
Is that customary? Because most of the ones I've been doing, they've been paying the prorated amount in the next month.
They could pay it on the second month. That's something that the landlord could set up. Again, one of the exceptions that can be done. It'd be up to the risk of the landlord wants to take that on, or whatever the case may be. When funds are paid out to the cooperating brokerage firm, it will be necessary to receive a completed, current, and dated in the current year IRS W-9 form. The W-9 form needs to be uploaded to Command along with the lease agreement and the agreement between brokers and copies of all the checks. So you always want to make sure too, at the time of execution, when you get all your monies, that you make copies of all the checks. We want proof that everything's been paid in the event there's a landlord-tenant dispute. And especially at the end of the lease, there's always a question. Sometimes the landlord doesn't want to give back the full security deposit. There's a lease, there's a dispute regarding condition and damage. And so many times we always get requested a copy of the security check. So you want to make sure you always have copies of that. All right, let's look at our contracts and addenda. So for you Zoomers, just stand by a minute. I'm going to stop sharing and I got to share my contracts. Okay. All right, so we're all on the same page. Y'all can see my contracts up here and on Zoom. You guys are seeing the same thing. All right, sweet. Okay, so the very first one is easy, right? This is our IABS form. So even our tenants get these. They're not just used for buying and selling real estate. They're also used for our tenant and our landlords. So if you're representing a tenant or a landlord, they still get the IABS form. There's also the broker notice to buyer and tenant. This is a really great form that helps explain to them physical conditions and inspections. I like this because it kind of tells them, okay, you know, we still need to do a kind of inspection on the property by a property condition form. This form is more along the lines of a rent-a-car form. You guys ever rent a car? And you have to go around the car and mark off all the dings and dents and all that. So we have the same process that we're going to use for a tenant. Here's our residential buyer tenant rep agreement. I gave you guys a copy of this. I put some helpful verbiage in for market area, what to use. And depending on when you start with your tenant, it's just like a regular contract. When does this agreement start and how long do you want to work with them? 6 months, maybe a year. It all depends on how long you think it's going to take to find them something. We mark on there that we're going to have an intermediary status because especially in leases, it's going to be highly likely that you hook them up with a Keller Williams listing and a Keller Williams lease. And it's totally fine for you guys to represent both, even if you're the listing agent. We do a lot of intermediary on rentals. It's totally fine. So this is a pretty standard buyer tenant rep agreement. I don't really need to go into all the nitty gritty of that because you guys at this stage have seen a million of those. You just want to make sure you have the right fees in there. So typically on a lease listing, we collect 100% of the first month's rent, 50% goes to the listing company and 50% goes to the leasing company is how that works. And if the landlord decides to sell, it's a typical 3% commission or customary. Or, you know, you could put in there whatever you want. There's a protection period in there. So this is pretty standard. The only thing I added in this one was in special provisions. I put in there that buyer tenant will notify any on-site sales or leasing office or custom home builder that buyer tenant is represented and will register agent with sales leasing office. That's a typo, that should be is. And then the only other changes I did on that, I think that's it.
Aaron,
Yeah,
I want to ask a question about that paragraph where you had 3% construction loan or whatever that was. Can you kind of explain that? Because I've never actually explained that paragraph to my clients, and I want to make sure I understand what that is. Going up where it says 3% of the purchase price. No, that go down. It's a paragraph past this. Keep going down. There, paragraph F. Usually I just put NA there. I've never really like focused on that.
Okay, this is construction. If they go to buy something that's under construction, so it's not something that's improved or tract housing, it's like dirt, that you'll still get paid 3% of it. So it's under construction.
But doesn't that same thing apply up top where it says 3%, no matter what it is?
So if they, so right up here, let's see. 3% of the gross sales price if they agree to purchase property in the market area. This one pertains to, say there's dirt, it's not listed on the MLS. They see a home builder that's building something. And so we consider that just construction. And so that's what that would take care of that.
Okay.
Or if it's dirt and they're paying a contractor to construct the house, we're gonna want to get paid commissions on the total improvement that gets done on it.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification. I've always put NA there.
Yeah,
But
to
I will change it
negotiate
from
the
here on out.
construction of improvement to the property.
Thank you. Does that
You're welcome.
count for like a mobile home?
Uh, um,
Probably
not
not.
typically. Yeah, not typically.
Probably not, because most of those mobile home people have inside sales agents. So I'm thinking that we probably wouldn't, because I'm representing somebody right now with land, and I was
Yeah.
curious.
This really
Okay.
is more geared for buying a dirt of land and they're having, you know,
A
Tilson
custom home
homes.
like Tilson Builders or
Exactly.
somebody. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. And then just so that you guys know, we do have a termination of a buyer tenant rep agreement. A lot of folks don't even know that you can terminate the buyer rep agreement. And so there is a termination for that. Thank you. If anybody's needs a copy of the contracts. So in the event that you have a buyer that no longer wants to use your services anymore, we do have a termination that needs to be filled out. And just so that you guys are aware. And now let's get into the residential lease application. On the residential lease application, this is something that you don't fill out. You make sure you have the tenant fill it out. But up here is where you normally put the address of the property and the rent and all those. So when they initially fill this out, leave this blank. This way you can make photocopies, several copies. And then when you're ready to submit the application on a subject property, go ahead and fill that in. Does that make sense? This way you're not having the poor tenant do this multiple times. And so this is all information for them to fill out, not for you. But they're going to fill out a lot of details, their social security number, their driver's license number, date of birth, weight, height, all of those things. If they go on to Smart Move later on in the process, they'll have to be putting that information in. But it's also helpful because the landlord will compare this information with what they put in Smart Move as well for any discrepancies or an error or an oopsie, right?
So they have to put that.
They have to put this information in. It's going to ask for their previous landlord, previous address. Again, what they fill in here will probably be compared to what happens in Smart Move. They'll have to talk about their current employer and previous employer. They have to list all the vehicles that are going to be parked on the property. And then they have to list any pets that they're dealing with. And then this section talks about fees. Every property, so when they can leave this out because every property is going to be different. For any of you guys who have already been looking at rentals, every listing agent has a different dang fee in there. So, you leave this open and blank because every time they submit an application somewhere, the fee is probably going to be different. So don't stress out about that. This bottom section is required for the landlord to fill out. So when you are representing the landlord as a listing agent, this is the section where you say, Mr. Landlord, when you get an application, please fill in their name and whether they're approved or not approved, the reason for the disapproval. This way it's sort of logged in for fair housing. We have another form called authorization to release information related to a residential lease application. And this is a form where a tenant, if a landlord requests it, can go ahead and sign and approve that I'm okay with the landlord's broker and landlord's representative looking at my stuff. I give permission to my current and former employees to release any information, to my current and former landlord to release any information. You want this filled out also in the event when, if the landlord is trying to call their employer to verify, and the employer says, well, I need something in writing that, Joe Smith is okay with this. There's a lot of people that don't want to give out information. So by having your tenant sign this, it gives the green light for the process to go faster, for them to get the approvals and the verifications that need to be done. This is an authorization to obtain the consumer report. It says the tenant's going to sign that they understand that the consumer report may be used to determine their credit worthiness, credit standing, credit capacity, their character, general reputation, personal characteristics, or mode of living, as authorized by the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I authorize any owner, landlord, or lender, or broker involved in my real estate transaction to discuss among themselves the information in the consumer report. Mhm.
Do we give all of these at once to the tenant to film, or do we wait till after they do the smart and then we go for it?
I think for these kind of disclosures, give it along with the application. This way they sign everything all at once in their little buyer packet. The question was, when do we give these forms out? And so the answer is in their in their tenant packet, right? When you first meet them, the first outing. This way you can have them sign it, make multiple copies, and you have a package for yourself. So as you're submitting stuff, you don't have to keep asking, right? You got multiple copies and you can kind of shotgun. Sometimes you might have to shotgun applications for the meaning, send out multiples to try to get them something. We have a document called the Residential Lease Guarantee. This is very helpful for those who are just starting out in life. They don't have a lot of credit history and those things, and they need a family member to guarantee the lease. So I just want to cover a couple of paragraphs so you understand the severity or the detail, or how somebody guarantees really on the hook to guarantee this lease, right? So it says, if any tenant fails to make any payment under the lease, guarantors will, upon demand, make such payment to the landlord or the landlord's agent, property management company. Payments under the lease include, but are not limited to, rent, the late charges, return check charges, attorney's fees, repair costs, pet charges, utility charges, and reimbursements to the landlord. Maintenance charges, charges for property damage. So it's not, the guarantor is not only just covering the monthly lease, they're covering pretty much any expense or damage or anything caused by the tenant that's owed to the landlord. If tenant otherwise breaches the lease, guarantors will, upon demand, cure the breach, as the lease may require of the tenant, or compensate the landlord for the landlord's loss resulting from the breach. 6 months in, the tenant takes off and abandons the house, the guarantor is responsible. He's responsible for the remainder of the 6 months on the lease, any damages, repair costs, pet, utilities. They abandon the utilities and gas and electric is running, somebody needs to pay it. Guess what? The landlord's gonna demand that the guarantor pay it. This guarantee applies when the lease commences and continues until the lease ends, including any extension or renewal of the lease. The date that you want to fill in here is the date that you do on the lease on the lease agreement, it should match when that lease agreement expires. However, this paragraph also states when the lease agreement expires, if an automatic renewal kicks in or they renegotiated something, the guarantor is going to be on the hook for it. Yeah, when leases expire, I'll show you in the lease thing. It does go automatic renewal month to month unless somebody terminates and it shuts it down. So in that case, the guarantor is still on the hook if that kicks in play. And this paragraph F is where you would X if the guarantor will submit an application or not submit an application. It all just depends if the landlord's going to want one. Most 99% of the time, if there's a guarantor involved, he's going to want an application on them as well.
I'm sorry, excuse me, I might have missed it. How does the guarantor void their relationship if it renews automatically?
So if a lease, and I'll go into that when we get to the lease section. Yeah, I'm going to cover that when we get into the lease section, why that would kick into play. Just know a guarantor is kind of always dangling out there. And once they put their John Hancock on this thing, they are responsible just as much as the tenant is, probably if not even more, honestly. So here's the application for guarantor of a residential lease. So they have a different application. It's not the same application as a tenant. They do have an application, but it's just slightly different than a tenant's one. So it's only 2 pages. Actually it's only just 1 page. I don't know why this says page 2 of 2. Adverse action notice and credit score disclosure. Adverse action. Let's kind of read this a little bit. It says to the tenants from the landlord regarding the application lease concerning the property. The landlord has taken the following adverse action. I put a sample in there, denied of the lease application. And then he states in there for the following reasons: you failed to meet the rental criteria for this property, or this adverse action is based in whole or part on the information contained in your consumer report. And this is a great document to give to the tenant, just to let them know, what happened and why. And because that gives you kind of clear, defined termination of everything. This way later on, there's not a complaint filed against you or the landlord that, they just told me, I didn't get the lease, or they denied me. I don't know why, maybe they violated fair housing. So if you put this transparency, you let them know why they're being denied. It kind of does not leave mucky waters to wade in potential problems with fair housing issues.
So it's recorded in both sections where residential lease application is where landlord comments are at.
So yeah, so on the lease application, the comments, he's gonna have his comments on the bottom, but this kind of takes it to the next level because on the bottom of that other one, it's just gonna say he denied it, but this will tell you why. It's either you didn't meet the rental criteria, meaning we're going to go into what his criteria could be, number of cars or number of people in the building. Sometimes there's family of 10 or 15. Well, we're not going to allow 10 or 15, right? Property code is only 2 humans per bedroom, I think it is. I don't know that for sure, but there's a limit on how many humans can be in a bedroom. So if you have a large family, right, that's not going to work, right? And so they wouldn't meet the rental criteria based on that. Or box number 2 says based on the consumer reporting agency. if he uses My Smart Move, he has a lot of reports he could say based on any number of reports. He can be very detailed in here as to why.
So all tenants above 18 were responsible.
Mhm.
And then under is there a co-application? So like what would be the difference? So if it's a husband and wife, are they, both their names are in the applicant's line?
Yes, so let me go back up. The question is, back to application. I'm gonna go back there. Did I pass it? Okay, so the question is on the application about a co-applicant.
You just give us.
Okay, right up here.
Yes, right.
Mhm. Okay. So we have the applicant, and so say it's John Smith. Is there a co-applicant? Yes. If so, co-applicant must submit a separate application. And that might be Mary Smith because her income and all that needs to be accounted for as well. So you have two applicants. We fill out an application for everybody over 18, but they might not necessarily be using their income. They're not responsible for the lease. This is just going to be the husband. I hate to say that because that's not really politically correct today. You have two people that are going to be responsible for the lease, both incomes. One is applicant, one's co-applicant. Husband, wife, husband, wife, wife. They're both going to be responsible for the lease. Yes, both incomes, both credit reports.
So if they're not, say for instance, you have a husband and wife,
Mm-hmm.
say the wife's the breadwinner, the
Mm-hmm.
husband's stay home dad.
Yeah, I would probably do just one applicant, it'd just be
And
her
stay-at-home dad.
occupant.
And if it's whoever is going to be providing the income, they need to fill out an
Yeah,
application.
everybody over 18 is going to fill out an application just so they know who's going to be occupying and have their information, but only an applicant or co-applicant marked here will be responsible for. So like we have a son, you know, he's 19 years old. You could put all his information on there, or he could be just listed as an occupant here. Let me just see, there's a section here. They like an application for everybody over 18, but employer and all that information, you could just leave blank NA. It'd be more along the lines if you got, you know, college students, 4 or 5 students living in a house and that kind of thing. That's more kind of what that's geared for, right? You're gonna have 4 adults living in the house, but only 2 are gonna be responsible for the lease, so there's a co-applicant, that kind of thing. You look still confused. I'll try to see if I can.
I think all 4 of them would check if there's co-applicants.
So,
unless you're working, you know,
Mhm.
say like it's college students, that's the way I understand. Now, if you have, say, the one an application, they're all applicants, but only 2 are going to be considered for the rental. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Thank you. Try to explain it. Okay. Okay, let's see. Where were we? Residential lease. You just went through that, Laura, with your son.
Yes.
All right, so let's look at the lease itself. So we have the landlord's information, the tenant's information, all the tenants who are over 18 that are going to be responsible for the rent go in there. The landlord leases to tenant the following real property. So this is the address of the subject property. In here, items, you would list the items such as washer, dryer, and refrigerator that are going to remain with the property because those considered non-realty items. So if the landlord's presenting a unit that's fully up and running, turnkey, fridge, washer, dryer, all those things will go in here. And that's so to make sure that those items stay when they move out, right? And they don't walk away. The term, I mean, that's self-explanatory. That's their move-in date and the end date. They're going to do a 1 year or 2 year. Tenant must occupy the property within 5 days after the commencement date. If the tenant is unable to occupy the property by the 5th day of the commencement date because of construction on the property or prior tenants holding over to the property, the tenant may terminate this lease by giving written notice. It's an important paragraph because sometimes we have one tenant in place and another's coming in. And so in the event your tenant was supposed to move in and the other one isn't out yet, and we're up to the 5-day mark, guess what? Your tenant has a right to say, I'm not waiting anymore, I'm out. And so we'll be able to terminate the lease at that point. And that unfortunately happens quite a bit. The landlord can't get the other party out for some reason, or the place is a mess, it's not ready. It's okay. This agreement says it's okay for the tenant, the new tenant, to say, I'm out, I'm not waiting anymore. Please, we need to go find something else. Automatic renewal and notice of termination. This lease automatically renews on a month-to-month basis unless the landlord or tenant provides the other party with written notice of termination as provided in paragraph 4A. Oral notice of termination is not sufficient under any circumstances. So even though we have a termination date, an ending date in the agreement, there still has to be a process where the landlord and the tenant come to an agreement. Yeah, I'm not removing, I'm out. On month 11, the tenant says, thank you, Mr. Landlord, it's been a great run, I bought another house, I'm out. Or the landlord says, okay, thank you, Mr. Tenant, it's been a great run, I'm putting my house on the market, and so I just, we're not going to renew the lease. If no notice is given, then it's going to automatically renew on a month-to-month. A, this lease automatically renews on a month-to-month basis unless landlord and tenant provide the other party the written notice of termination. And then this is where we can tell 30 days notice or 60 days notice. A1 is typical 30-day. We would use A2, we wanted 60 days notice. So the landlord says, hey, I'm only going to take a year rental. I want to sell my house at the end of this thing. So he might say, I'm going to give 60 days notice. I want 60 days notice termination on this, because if they move out, I want a couple of months notice so I can, quickly get my house on the market, or vice versa. I just want 60-day notice because it's a tough rental market. It's going to take me a long time to rent this thing. So I want as much runway as possible. A tenant might negotiate that they want to do 60 days as well as 30 because they know they might want to buy something. And so they want to have a long runway to get out as well. So either or, typical is just 30 days notice. Again, it states in here, if landlord or tenant fails to provide the other party timely written notice of termination, automatically renews month to month. That's the third time it says that in the lease. If this lease automatically renews on a month-to-month basis, it will continue to renew on a month-to-month basis until either party provides written notice of termination to the other party, and the notice of termination will be effective on 1 or 2. Item 1 is on the last day of the month, or 2 on the date designated in the notice. Monthly rent. This is pretty self-explanatory. This is where we'll put in the amount of the monthly rent for the full month. The full month's rent is due and payable no later than upon lease execution. And then this tells you what form of payment the landlord prefers: cashier's check, electronic payment, money order. Notice I don't have personal check in here, or other means acceptable to the landlord. I don't know what else that would be, but you discuss with the landlord the forms of payment that he's going to be comfortable with. Prorated rent. If the client is moving in mid-month, this is where you would prorate the rent. I always get asked how to calculate the math on that. So the best way to figure out per diem is if you have a monthly rent, say it's $2,000 a month, just do that times 12, then take that amount divided by 365, and that's your per diem. So just take your monthly rent times 12, divided by 365, and that's your per diem, that's your daily amount. Place of payment. This is really important because this is where the landlord states where he wants his money to go. Method of payment. There's a whole paragraph on how he's to be paid. In this section, it's probably okay to mark anything because at this tells the tenant, you have to pay me at a certain time, and I don't care how you get it to me, you just need to get it to me. This way, there's no excuse that the tenant says, well, I couldn't get a cashier's check. Oh, I couldn't get a money order. If you mark all boxes, there's no excuse to say there was no way for them to get the money to you. It's just a helpful tip. If the landlord asks you what you should put there, he should mark all the boxes. This way, there's no excuse again for them not being able to get the money. Late charges, I gave you guys some examples in there. Of course, the landlord can charge whatever he wants, but this typically covers charges a bank would charge for return checks and late charges. If his bank charges $35 for a bounce check or those things, then put 35 in there. But I think this day and age is still charged 25, I'm not sure. But this is more related to bank charges the landlord would have to pay if they bounce checks and those things. Here's a return payment charge. So let's talk about pets. Unless the parties agree otherwise in writing, tenant may not permit even temporarily any pet on the property. This is where he would charge an amount, like a penalty. He charges a lump sum amount in the beginning and then thereafter a per diem amount. Security deposit. This is where you put the amount of security deposit in and how he wants payment. I marked on here cashier's check, so you guys know. Just take cashier's check. This paragraph is important. Refund. Tenant must give landlord at least 30 days written notice of surrender before landlord is obligated to account for or refund the security deposit. Any refund of the security deposit will be made payable to all tenants named in the lease. This is helpful to know if you've got a husband and wife that they have an argument, they both want to abandon the lease. They're like not getting along, they want to get a divorce. Well, the landlord's going to pay the check to both of them. Deductions. This is a good paragraph for you guys to read and understand what deductions are. These are the items that the landlord can take away from the security deposit. So this is an important paragraph that you explain to the tenant, especially if they're a big family, kids, dogs. You want to make sure they understand that if they do damages to the property, the landlord's going to take money from the security deposit. So damages to the property, excluding normal wear and tear and all reasonable costs associated to repair the property. Costs for which tenant is responsible to clean, deodorize, exterminate, and maintain the property. He will deduct money for unpaid or accelerated rent, unpaid late charges, unpaid utilities, unpaid pet charges, replacing unreturned keys or garage door openers. Garage door openers is a big one. If your tenant gets 2 garage door openers when he moves in, he needs to return 2 garage door openers in working order. The removal of unauthorized locks or fixtures installed by tenants. Sometimes we have tenants that install all kinds of gate locks and extra door locks. If the landlord has to remove all those, he's going to deduct that cost. Missing or burned out light bulbs and fluorescent tubes, packing, removing and storing abandoned property, removing abandoned or illegal parked vehicles. Believe it or not, we had all of those in the last couple of months, those issues. He can deduct the cost for attorney's fees, costs to restore walls, flooring, landscaping. Hi, Don Juan. Damages to the property caused by smoking, stains, burns, odors, removal of debris, costs to rekey certain security devices. If deductions exceed the security deposit, tenant will pay to landlord the excess within 10 days after the landlord makes a written demand. How that will be enforceable is through an attorney, unfortunately. Utilities, it's pretty standard and customary. The tenant pays for all the connection fees on utilities, not the landlord. Occupants, this is where you would list all the occupants that are going to be staying at the property. They're required to give the landlord their phone numbers and email addresses, even when they change, just the way landlord always has current information. The tenant has to apply to all the HOA rules. If you are the listing agent and your homeowner's listing a home for lease in a very strict community, you want to make sure you have those HOA rules and regulations to give to the tenant. So this way they don't make an oopsies or do some violations to hurt the landlord. Unless otherwise authorized by this lease, tenant may not install or permit any of the following on the property: a spa, a hot tub, above ground pool, trampoline, or any item which causes a suspension or cancellation of insurance coverage or an increase in insurance premiums. Tenant may not permit any part of the property to be used for activity which is a nuisance, offensive, noisy, or dangerous, repairs of vehicles, or any type of business. This paragraph is the parking rules paragraph. This is really helpful if you're a listing agent for the landlord and he really wants to restrict the amount of people or occupants in the house. This is a great paragraph to do that. If you put in 3-4 vehicles, then you know in your mind that's 3-4 adults with cars. And so if he's looking to restrict occupants in a house, this is a good paragraph to do that. So I always make sure they're very conservative on this parking rule. Because you can always make an exception, right? If you got a good applicant and it says, you know what, I just got 1 college age kid, we just got 3 cars, and the landlord can make an exception to that, right? But this helps alleviate having tenants move in I'm sure you guys have seen rental properties where the garage, the driveway is full, they're parking all up and down the street, right? 4, 5, 6 cars, it's a nuisance. So this is a great widely used paragraph. Key box, we get a lot of questions about key box. Make sure you explain this paragraph to both landlord and tenant very thoroughly. We always have issues with this. A key box is a locked container placed on the property holding a key to the property. The key box is opened by a special combination key or program access device, so that persons with the access device may enter the property, even in tenant's absence. The key box is a convenient but involves risk such as unauthorized entry, theft, property damage, or personal injury. Neither the Association of Realtors nor MLS requires the use of a key box. And then this we put in, tenant authorizes landlord or the property manager a key box containing a key to the property during the last 30 days. This is very, very important that you explain this. We have so many issues with this. If a landlord knows he needs to sell the house, or he's going to put it up for rent again, he's going to hire the same brokerage to go ahead and market the house. So we want it in writing now up front that the tenant knows 30 days before they leave, a key box is going on the property.
So why do we have a key box authorization form?
So, right, exactly. So this states in here that we're going to do that, but then we need a separate key box authorization form just to make sure at the time this occurs that they're also ready, willing, and able to do that. And we could cite that, well, you did agree to it in your lease agreement. So we do have two. Tenant may withdraw the authorization to place the key box on the property, but pay the landlord a fee to do so. We make this exorbitant 1 month's rent, so it's not, it kind of takes away the incentive for them to want to do that. Moving condition, this is an important paragraph. This kind of states the type of condition that they're going to be move into, that's in good condition. And if there's something that they see right away that they need the landlord to repair, we're going to put it right in here. And this states in here that they have 7 days to do an inventory condition form and deliver it to the landlord. This is like your rent-a-car form. Move out. This dictates how they move out and leave the property. Room swept and clean, free of trash, debris. I want to cover this property maintenance paragraph with you. This is another one we always get in issues with. This tells in detail, this paragraph 17, how they're supposed to maintain the property. Keep it clean and sanitary. Replace bulbs, batteries, carbon monoxide garage door openers, ceiling fan remotes, those things. Water the foundation is important. Promptly notify landlord in writing of all needed repairs. So they have to just do maintenance to the property, right? They're not going to do repairs to the property. And the difference always gets very confusing. We always get phone calls on this. So the tenant's only to maintain the property, the landlord is to do their repairs. That is the opposite of a buyer's temporary lease and a seller's temporary lease. I'm going to show you guys that at the end of the class, where on a buyer's temporary lease and seller's temporary lease, they're responsible for the repairs. It's opposite, it's flipped. As a tenant on a normal lease, they're only responsible for maintenance. Landlord does the repairs. It's important you guys understand the concept and don't confuse the two. Yard maintenance. If the landlord wants to specifically talk about watering, because watering here is an issue here in Houston, this is where he would put it in there. I want my lawn watered 2 times a week or for 20 minutes a week or whatever the case may be. It's also an issue watering here because of our foundations and our soil. And then this section will dictate who's going to maintain what. Typically, it's a tenant's expense will maintain the yard. That is customary. Pool spa maintenance. Any pool or spa on the property will be maintained according to a pool spa maintenance addendum. And then there's prohibitions. Prohibitions. How do I say that? Prohibitions. Prohibitions. I need another cup of coffee to say that one. If tenant installs any fixtures on the property, authorized or unauthorized, such as additional smoke alarm, additional carbon monoxide detectors, locks, alarm systems, cables, satellite dishes, blah, blah, blah. The tenant may not remove any part, the tenant has to get okay with it by the landlord in writing. And he also may not remove any part of the property or any of the landlord's personal property from the property. They can't remove, change, add, or rekey any lock. Let's talk about rekey. There's a confusion with that as well. When the landlord first puts the property up for rent, he should rekey it at that time. When one tenant leaves before the next one comes in, it should be rekeyed at that time. Once a tenant moves in, they can't go and rekey it and then lock the landlord out and nobody has access and keys. That can't happen. They can't make holes in the woodwork, the floors, or the walls, except that a reasonable number of small nails may be used to hang pictures. But they can't go damaging and putting all kinds of cockamamie stuff in the property. It's not permitted. They're not permitted to put any water furniture on the property. I don't even think they make those anymore. Do they still make water beds these days? I know, right? They used to be big in the day, but that's really what that's for, water beds. They can't install additional phone or video cables, outlets, antennas, satellite receivers, or alarm systems. They need to get okay, seek permission. And these days, all that stuff is really Bluetooth and wireless. So, I mean, back in the day, these things used to have wires all over the place. That's kind of passe. They can't alter, replace, or remove flooring material, paint, or wallpaper. They can't install, change, or remove any fixture, appliance, or non-realty property item. Listed in paragraph 2, that would be the fridge, washer, dryer. They can't keep hazardous material on the property or flammable or explosive stuff. They cannot keep or permit any material item which causes any liability or fire or extended insurance coverage to be suspended or canceled by what they're putting on there. They can't have motor oil and radiator fluid and that kind of stuff disposed of on the property. They can't cause or allow any lien to be filed against the property. So in other words, they can't go buy something and then use the house as collateral. This way, if they don't pay it, that person will put a lien on the property. They can't use the property for that. They can't disconnect or intentionally damage a carbon monoxide detector or violate any ordinance. Failure to maintain. If the tenant fails to comply with paragraph 17 or a pool and spa maintenance addendum, the tenant is obligated to, if they violate any of those, the landlord can get reasonable expenses paid back to them, including any administrative fees assessed. In other words, if they violate all that, the landlord's going to come after them for the expenses of that stuff. Repair requests, it's really important that the tenant understands that they don't have to do repairs. The landlord's obligated to do those repairs, and the landlord should provide a phone number in here for emergency. If the landlord is not using a property management company, this should be the landlord's phone number. He's got to be the 911 call. I'm kind of gonna skip through these. Just read these paragraphs so that way you understand them and you know what's in there. I highlighted the most important things that get people in trouble. Security devices, exterior door locks, again, don't change the locks. They're not permitted to do that stuff, period. Early termination, let's talk about that. We get sometimes a situation where a tenant will go ahead and do a 1-year lease, and then for some reason, something happens in life and they want to terminate the lease. Basically, the property code says they can't. It's up to the landlord to forgive them for that. And they have to work it out with the landlord. If there's not a rapport between them and the landlord, they're not getting along, there's fighting going on, conflict going on, then they're going to have to hire an attorney to help them get out of it. But basically, property code, they owe the rent. If the landlord can find somebody to get in, sometimes the landlord will just forgive it. What can a landlord do to you? Basically, all they can really do is file a complaint with the credit bureau, hurt your credit even more. They would have to get an attorney to do anything else to you. But if a tenant walks away, they're just going to put their credit in jeopardy, really. There's really not too much anybody can do to enforce these things other than, get an attorney and file, charges, a lien against you, a judgment sometimes. Assignment and subletting, you can't do it. If you want to get out and you want to sublet your lease, you have to get permission from the landlord. The landlord has to vet them and do another application process and see if that's okay. So basically, you can't do it. We have an addenda section where we're going to attach addenda to the lease. The inventory condition form gets attached, a pet agreement. There's an agreement between brokers and the residential lease application. Those things get attached to the lease. And we have a notices section, just like on our 1 to 4 family, where everybody needs to put their information in there that's current. So this way the landlord and tenant know how to get a hold of each other. Paragraph F, this is just, heaven forbid something should happen, how the landlord can get a hold of somebody next of kin to remove contents in the property and dispose of security deposit and those things. Paragraph I is important. This lets everybody know who the landlord's broker is, but our company policies, you mark, will not act as the property manager. Keller Williams does not practice property management. And then that's it. And then this is where everybody signs. This is where the landlord gives notice that he signed it and gives a copy to the tenant. That's 16 pages of the lease. I just covered the highlights because we have a lot of other addenda. Does anybody, before I move on, have any questions about the lease? How are my Zoomers doing out there? You all quiet.
Doing good. I do have a question. Hey, Karen.
Yeah.
Okay, quick question on, I had a landlord make an exception, and that was to allow the tenant to leave at month 10 or 11.
Yeah.
But the requirement would be that the tenant would owe an extra month's rent, meaning that that would cover 30 days for the landlord. And I had that in writing by both parties, amongst themselves, actually, with the other agent's permission. And that was successfully conducted. But I had to actually note that into the contract, not writing law, but making reference.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's you know, and that's totally okay, right? If you, you know, the landlord and tenant want to come into agreement of what their terms are going to be, that's totally okay. That's okay to do.
Great.
If the tenant knows, I think in your case, I think we talked about that. In your case, the tenant knew he wasn't going to be able to fulfill a 12-month term, right?
That's exactly right. Just,
Yeah.
yeah, as a statement.
Mhm. So he wanted a 12-month lease agreement, but he wanted all parties to know, hey, there's a high likelihood I only can fulfill 10 months, right? So,
That's exactly it. Yep.
yeah. And that's great. Transparency is good. Imagine if the tenant didn't do that and it, you know, 10 months in, he says, oh, you know, I need to go. Then he has to renegotiate with that. And then the landlord could be, depending on what's going on in his life, he might not be so generous, right?
Is that likely paid up front? Or
Well, they'll come to agreement how they want. I think if you get any monies, it should be paid up front. What did your client do? Are they going to pay that up front? If that extra 30 days, David?
Well, for mine, it was, they would pay it at the end. So it should have been up front, but they just agreed at the end. They agreed if it didn't meet the 12 months and they went short 10, then they would pay an extra
Mhm.
month at the end.
Right. So probably with their last month's rent check, just go ahead and put it on there.
That's right. That's it.
That's awesome. Good job negotiating that. It's always best to negotiate things up front, give everybody a long runway and time, you know. I always, you know, when you put somebody under pressure, the outcome is usually not very favorable. Like, you know, I always tell my kids, if, you know, my kids ask, Mom, I want to go sleep over so-and-so's, and I need an answer now. I said, well, if you need an answer now, the answer is no. But if you give me some time to marinate and think on it, you know, my answer might be different. So it's the same thing in negotiations and these things, right? If you give everybody enough time, enough heads up, nobody's under pressure, the outcome is always so much more favorable. We do have a residential lease amendment. So if the lease ever has to be amended, guess what? Texas Realtors has an amendment. So you can amend the security deposit, you can amend the rental amount, you can amend the occupants, the parking rolls, notices. This is really helpful. You know, you always tell the tenant, hey, if something happens, you got to change your phone number or your email. Just let us know, let the landlord know. But before or right after the lease is done and we have to make quick amendments and changes, just know there's an amendment out there for you guys to do that and use it. Here's your lease inventory and condition form. This is my little rent-a-car form. So just have them, you know, I always tell a tenant, hey, you know, you got 7 days, but in the first couple of days, just fill this out and get it done. And they don't send it to you, they send it to the landlord. You could say, you could send me a copy, but it's really important the landlord gets it.
In my situation, never, I mean, I asked a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mhm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We just have a statement for the Zoomers that she had a tenant that never fills these out, or she's had tenants in the past that don't fill them out. I mean, it's their prerogative if they don't fill it out, but you know, 12 months down the road, the landlord says, well, I'm gonna hold back, you know, $50 or $100 or $200 because you broke this. And they'll say, no, it was broken when I moved in. Well, there's no proof of that, right? So yeah, so this is why we have this form, is to just cover that, protect them. Pet agreement. This is the pet agreement to agree to have pets. Very self-explanatory. So we want to know the type, the breed, if they're neutered or not, they got shots. We should always charge a deposit for pets to clean and take care of damage. If the landlord wants to charge an additional rent, so say he was, asking for 2,500 and decide, oh, you know what? I like these people. They got a little tiny doggy. I'll just increase the rent to $25. This is where you would put that in there. So this just takes care of all the important stuff that needs to be disclosed about their pets. And then I have in here, so as a reminder to you guys, in case you forget what you learned in real estate school, service animals are not pets. And therefore no pet agreement nor deposit is involved. Just a reminder. We have an addendum regarding lead-based paint. That comes into play with leases. A lot of people don't know that. And then if they're leasing a home that has a pool and spa, we have an addendum to address the care of the pool and spa. Here's our intermediary. If you guys are going to represent both a landlord and a tenant, you're free to do so. Just use your intermediary.
Hi, Karen.
This is your-
Can I ask you a quick question? This is Simi.
Sure.
On this one, if we are representing both buyer and listing for the lease, but in our buyer listing agreement, we had put like 50% commission for the month. How does that work?
So you represent the landlord. So in your listing agreement, hopefully you put 100% is due to the brokerage, Keller Williams, and we pay out 50 to the listing company and 50 to the leasing company. So if you represent both, you are, you should be paid 100%. If you want to work out something different with the seller and you want to say, well, I'll give you a break, then you do an amendment to the listing.
Okay.
And the amendment to the listing to amend how you're discounting the commissions.
So in our listing agreement, I should have put 100% instead of 50% of month's rent as a
Yes,
listing.
in the listing agreement, it should have been 100%. The landlord owes the brokerage 100% of the first month's rent.
I see.
And then you're going to pay the leasing brokerage 50% of that or 20% of that or whatever you feel you want to pay.
I see. I think I was missing that point. When I represent buyer tenant, then I used to put 50%. So first time I'm representing a listing landlord basically. So I still used 50%. So I probably need to amend that to 100%.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. Thank you.
Here's the agreement between brokers. This is very, 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 very important. This is how we all get paid. So if you are representing a tenant and it's listed by another brokerage, say Century 21, Century 21 is going to require this agreement to be between brokers to be done. This puts on there how much you're being paid. And also allows for if the property gets sold, do you want commissions out of it? Our brokerage requires this form and every other brokerage requires this form. And right on the bottom, what does it say? Submit IRS form W-9 to the listing broker for payment of fee. So these two, the W-9 and this go hand in hand. They're like Siamese twins, they can't be separated. They go together. The W-9 and agreement between brokers.
In reality, have you ever seen this happen that we get the sale price 3% if any tenant buys that house? Is that what it means?
I'm sorry?
Where like if you move a little bit up on this slide, where it says like sales for sales 3%. So when you say sales, that particular tenant buys that house, that's what it means?
Yep.
And in reality, have you seen that happen, like in practical? Because I have never seen that, you know. I never fill anything in these columns.
Mm.
So it happens though, meaning
Yeah.
something like
Mhm.
this happens. Okay. So we need
Yeah.
to talk to the tenant, or in this case, like whether he plans to buy this house in the future
No,
or something.
this is the agreement between brokers. So if the brokerage brokers the deal for the landlord to sell the property to the tenant, they are to pay us 3%.
Okay. Okay.
Landlord agrees to sell the property to the tenant during the term of the lease, including any renewal or extension. Listing broker will pay the other broker an additional fee equal to 3%.
I see. I see. Okay. I missed that part.
The
Sorry.
fee is earned when the landlord agrees to sell the property to the tenant and is payable when the listing broker receives the listings broker's fee for the sale. So they have to be using the listing broker to brokerage it.
Got it. Thanks.
We have a bed bug addendum. I know it's kind of gross, but we have a bed bug addendum. I think it's up to the landlord if they want to require this, but this just states that the landlord's not aware of any evidence indicating the presence of bed bugs. Yeah. And then, you know, they all have to mark whether they're aware of bed bugs or not. It's not widely used, but it's there. Here's the listing agreement. This is where we're at 11:30, so we're making good time. So residential real estate listing agreement. This is when you represent the landlord owner and you want to list the property for lease. So up here, this section would be where the landlord primarily resides. This is his current home. It's not the subject property. This, of course, is all of our brokerage information. You put your phone number and email in there. So it says the landlord appoints the broker as the landlord's sole and exclusive real estate agent and grants to the broker the exclusive right to lease the property. This is where we put the property information in that we're leasing. So just remember the difference. This is where owner lives. This is the property he's going to allow you to put up on the market for rent. This is where he'll list all the stuff that he's leaving in there. Typically, it's washer, dryer, fridge. This is where he tells you how much rent he wants a month and what kind of lease term he's looking for. You know, this is where he tells you, I don't want anything less than a year and I'm not doing no more than 2 years. He might say, I'll go up to 5 years. Whatever he's comfortable with, this is the term of what you'll market to on the MLS. The listing, this is just like a regular listing, when the listing starts, when the listing ends. Typically on this, we do 1 year. This is broker compensation. When earned and payable, the landlord will pay the broker. We mark typically 100% of 1 full month's rent to be paid under a lease of the property. Broker's compensation is earned when any of the following occurs during this listing. The landlord agrees to lease or rent the property to anyone at any price on any terms. The broker individually or in cooperation with another broker procures a tenant, ready, willing, and able to lease, or the landlord breaches this listing. It's payable either during the listing or after it ends at the early of, or the time the landlord and any tenant agree to lease or rent the property. Agree to lease, that's upon execution. other compensation. You could do a renewal. It just depends on your relationship with the landlord. Do you want to charge him a fee when he renews it? Do you want to get paid? If so, you could put on there, okay, Mr. Landlord, if you renew the lease, you're gonna still owe me money. So if that's the case, typically people put NA or 50%. That's just a business decision you make. You also state in here that if he decides to sell it, there's a question?
Karen, I got a question. That is,
Yeah.
that is up to the agent, giving the 50 or putting NA in that section?
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah, this is a listing agreement between you and between the brokerage and the landlord, but you're his listing agent. So it's a business decision. Do you want to get paid for when he renews the lease? Or you're okay with just getting paid the first go around?
Thank you.
We
need to collect, yeah, so we need to collect 100% because guess what? On the next page, we're going to agree to co-op with another brokerage and we got to pay them a fee, right? So what are we going to pay them? We're probably going to pay them 50%. So that's why we need to collect 100%. I mean, you can agree to, so how you explain this to the landlord is, I'm going to put this on the MLS, I'm going to advertise it for lease, but I have to offer to pay the other brokerage some amount of money. So typically we're used to getting 50%. And you might say, I only want 25. So then you can put on there 75. But that's a very little amount of money. So, I mean, yeah. You don't need to be giving away your commissions. When somebody asks me to discount, I'll say, okay, well, let me ask my husband and kids if they're okay with not, me not going to buy food this week. I'll not put gas in my car. So, this is all regular listing. This is a paragraph you typically see in another listing, in our regular listing agreements. Access to the property is important. It lets the landlord know that we need access to the property, just like in a regular listing. And we need to make sure the tenant's okay with that. We do have a separate tenant agreement that we'll have the tenant fill out. And then scheduling companies, we use showing time. Again, we talk about a key box. And then here's where we talk about cooperating with other brokers where we'll pay them 50%. Just like in a listing. That's why we collect 100, right, Bruce, in the beginning. And then we mark, just like we do in a regular listing, that we want intermediary. We want to be able to walk tenants on the property and show them the property. And then the rest of this is just legal stuff that you guys just want to study your contract and know it. Make ready. Our company policy is for you to have D1 marked that the broker may not arrange for contractors to make repairs or alterations on the property. There are some brokerages that also do property management. So they'll go ahead and they'll put in here where they have a sort of a carte blanche, or the landlord gives them a blank check. Hey, I'm okay with you guys going on when one tenant vacates and do up to $500 worth of repairs. This is where that would be in there. We do not practice property management here, so you guys cannot do that. You have to put D1. But just so you know, this is what this pertains to. Companies that do property management, they're already kind of built into the contract, what they can go on property and take care of. The landlord may be away and say, hey, you know what? You guys have carte blanche to spend $500 to spruce things up. You don't need my permission. Just go do what you need to do. Take care of the property. These are questions that we ask the landlord. We want to make sure, just like in a regular listing, that one, we can put the house up for lease. That if there's a pool and a spa, that the fences and the gates and the latches are working accordingly, right? That he doesn't have the house up for sale or exchange with another brokerage, that we're free to go ahead and get a tenant in there and get a tenant committed. That the landlord is current and not delinquent on any loans or financial obligations. Back in the day, we used to have poor tenants in there, and the landlord was about to get foreclosed on, and they had to get evicted back in the day when we had a horrible market. So we just want to make sure that he's in good standing, where if we're going to move somebody in, that they're okay to live there for a year and everything is going to be okay.
So they provide proof of that?
No, we're just asking them to disclose it on here, but we're hoping that, this is sort of, they fill this in appropriately, I guess. Can we ever really verify somebody's telling us the truth? This is sort of like on an honor system that they tell us that, they're not in foreclosure, and, it's good to, this is something, maybe if you suspect something's odd, you have a conversation with them. Look, you really should let us know before we get a tenant in there if you're going to be in trouble. Or if something happens, let us know. And then we can help get the tenant out, If they, so here's a case in point, okay, they lie to us. The only thing the tenant can do is hire an attorney, right? And then the two attorneys go at it. Landlord's additional promises that he's going to cooperate with another brokerage. He's not going to rent or lease to sell the property during the listing without the broker's prior written approval. This is the same language that's in a regular listing agreement. Limitation of liability. This talks about how we're limited in what we'll be liable for. Key box authorization. My computer's about to die. I'm going to go ahead and get my plug. So let's just take a 2-minute break, you guys. If you want to go to the restroom, whatever, I need to plug my computer in. And then we have about 10 more pages. Let me see, we have about a few more documents to go, but let's just take 2 minutes out. Sorry, I need to plug in. Oh no. I know.
It's such a
Good.
good sign.
Yeah, because it was like doom and gloom on Friday.
I know, I was worried.
You learning something?
I'm learning a lot.
That's a brain power. Maybe in here. What's this other? No, thank you for bringing lunch. We're gonna be running about, probably be done about 12:05 or 12:10. Okay. We all back? Yeah, sweet. Thank you, guys. Few minutes little break. Okay. So let's see. Thanks for allowing me to charge her up. So we are still on the residential lease. We're on paragraph 14, limitation of liability. We have the same paragraph in a regular listing that we put up for sale. And this just talks about we're not responsible for freezing water pipes, damage to the property, and those things. It's a typical paragraph that we see in all of our listing agreements. Let's see. Addenda and documents that go along with the residential lease listing would be the IABS, of course. Lead-based paint if it's appropriate. The key box authorization by tenant. The W-9 should be marked there. Paragraph 20 is the lease requirements by the landlord. This is really helpful for him to fill this out, and you guys fill this out because this helps you create the lease. This tells us when he wants the monthly rent due, on what day of the month, what he wants to charge on those charges that we put into the lease. This is where we get all that information from. And we can relay this to the tenant, the tenant's agent. We can give this to them so that they can fill out the lease. Anybody can fill out the lease, you or the agent representing the tenant. But this is where all that information comes from. Whether he wants pets or not, or he wants to allow pets on a case-by-case basis, which is typically what you guys will see. If he wants a pet deposit, what his violations would be if somebody violates his pet, requirement. Of course, the big one, the security deposit. In here, if there's utilities that he wants specifically paid by the tenant or not, how many guests he wants on the property, the vehicle number, trip charge. Key box authorized during the last 30 or 60 days. Remember, that's in the lease. This is where it comes from. This is where he tells you how many days he wants the inventory and condition form. Because I want this delivered to me in 7 days or 10 days or 3 days. This is where the landlord will tell you, I want the yard to be maintained by me or by the tenant. This is where he tells you how he wants the pool and spa taken care of. And this is where the landlord tells you the phone number and who the tenant needs to call for repairs. So this is an important section of your listing agreement because what? This is how you fill out the lease. This is where he'll tell you he'll let you assign or sublet, or he'll let the tenant do that. If so, what the fee will be. I can tell you that this is generally an NA. And you don't really want the tenant to have the ability to assign or sublet that. You really want, that part of the equation taken out of the scenario. That is not in anybody's best interest to do that. Agreement of the parties. This paragraph 21 is the same paragraph that's in a regular listing. Additional notices. Brokers' compensation or the sharing of fees between brokers is not fixed or controlled. It's all, that's this whole section in here is also another requirement by track. I'm not going to go into that because you see that again in the other listing agreement. If you don't know what all this says, you should read it and understand it and study it. I'm not going to go over that today. This is a great form to give the landlord. General information for landlord regarding assistance animals. This also educates him on fair housing. This educates him on, if somebody comes to him with an assistant animal, what he's required to do or not do. So this takes the, kind of takes you out of the equation of having to have a difficult conversation with the landlord. And this explains to the landlord his do's and don'ts regarding that. This is a really important form to give the landlord. This talks about a disability, somebody coming in with disability. I can tell you in general, if somebody wants to lease the property and they have a disability, they need wheelchair access and those things. The landlord does not, he has to provide the ability for the tenant to have the option to do that. He's not required solely to bear that whole expense. The landlord and tenant can come to an agreement of what retrofitting needs to be done and who takes care of the cost of that. Most cases, the landlord gives the tenant permission to go ahead and retrofit. And then when they leave, they have to put it back to original condition. That's typically what happens. But of course, all that is up for the two of them to decide what they want to do. So this explains to the landlord how he can collect pet deposits and pet fees. This explains to the landlord about breed size and weight restrictions, explains to the landlord insurance policies, what kind of insurance he has to have on the property. And explains to the landlord that we can't give legal advice, that they should consult an attorney. So as you can see, this would be a very, very helpful informational document to give the landlord when he's about to put his house up for rent. And let's see, what else do I got here? Yeah, some insurance carriers won't insure, medical or damages or something. If something happens to somebody, because they got bit by your pit bull, those kinds of things. So there's certain animals they won't insure. And so you need to, yeah, aggressive. Doberman pinchers used to be part of that. Pit bulls, mastiffs. There's certain breeds of dogs that are not covered by insurance. Yes. Well, what this tells him, educate is call your insurance carrier and let them know, hey, I'm putting my home up for rent. He has to switch the type of insurance. And by the way, are there any breeds that, will violate my insurance or cause my insurance to go null and void? And they'll say, yeah, this is a list of animals. You can't read, you can't have that property. We don't insure. So that becomes what in your MLS listing, that becomes part of the lease where you can't have these pets on property. That's where you put in no pets or case by case basis. You'll find the majority of homeowners just don't want pets on property. And if so, it's very limited to like, little lap dogs, tiny dogs, and those things. It's too much liability. Here's a response to request for assistance animal. So if you have a tenant that has an assistance animal, this is a form that you would give to the landlord. The landlord and tenant fill this out. It lets the landlord be able to tell the tenant, I'm just prohibiting pets. I'm restricting the breed and size, and I'm charging a pet deposit or fee. And I know I can't charge that to you, but it's just letting them put them on notice that that was his policy. But please put down this description of your assistance animal. We want details on that to verify that this indeed is an assistance animal, right?
So would it be, this is like for exception. This is an for exception.
Yeah, emotional. And they're usually wonderful, but there's some people that have emotional pets that are like parrots and those kinds of weird things. And so,
And typically those types of animals would not be.
nope. Yeah, because they're not an aggressive animal. They're the opposite. Yeah. They're like little lassies, kind and good doggies. Texas Realtors has information out there, model information that it's not necessarily a form or a document, but has information that we can use as realtors to assist us in creating collateral materials for our listings, stuff that we can use in our marketing. And in this case, they have a model tenant selection criteria form. So they don't necessarily have a form for this, but they're telling us here's some model language that you can give your landlord so that way he can provide this to a tenant. You can provide this to the tenant's agent. And it's his selection criteria. It's created by the legal team at Texas Realtors. And it just simply lets the tenant know that the landlord's going to use he has a plan. He's going to use some criteria to be able to select who he wants renting his house. And of course, we're going to abide by fair housing. But it lets the tenant know that the landlord is going to, wants to check out criminal history. He's going to perform a criminal history check on you and verify the information provided by you on the lease application. The landlord's decision to lease the property to you may be influenced by the information contained in this report. He wants to look at your previous rental history. He wants to check out your current income and your credit history. And failure to provide accurate information in the application. Your failure to provide accurate information in your application or your provision of information that is unverifiable will be considered by the landlord when making the decision to lease the property to you. When you filled out your application and you put all this info and then you went on to My Smart Move and the two were contradictory, that's failure to provide accurate information. So he can use that as, you know, his judgment on whether he wants to accept you or not. So it's a great document. I use this document for my tenants. I actually put it in my packet that when I represent a tenant, it's part of their packet to let them know the landlord is going to be checking out these things. So don't lie on the application. You know, if there's something, if you have an issue now, criminal history, let's address it now. So criminal history is a tough one. If you have somebody who's infamous, you know, a brokerage I was with one time, we represented somebody that was very, very infamous, all over the TV and all over the news. And of course, you know, their home is seized by the government and all of this stuff, but they need a place to live, right? How does somebody like that find a place to live? Nobody's gonna want to rent to them. They don't want paparazzi and news and all kinds of stuff. And, you know, this person is you know, innocent until proven guilty, but did some heinous crimes. So how do you get this person housing? When you have somebody that's like that, has a bad criminal history, money talks. And so what most often has to happen is they pay a year or 2 years up front. This way it mitigates the landlord's risk. So if they need housing, that's what they're going to have to do. Sometimes they pay a premium. So if it's a property that's $3,000 a month, they're going to pay them $4,000, 12 months up front. Done. And you can use that premise for, you know, severe or not severe, whatever the case may be, but the criminal history is really a hard one to get through. And so if you have somebody that's explained to them that, you know what, it's landlord's risk, you know, are you going to get thrown in jail? You're going to go in prison and abandon the house, or, you know, there's going to be all kinds of people trampling all over my property, you know, paparazzi, those kinds of things, and do damage to the property. And so that's what the landlord's just trying to mitigate risk. So if you can mitigate his risk, pay him for his risk, and you'll be fine. Same with credit history. Credit history is really hard to overcome, especially if somebody's had really bad credit history. Again, the only way to overcome that is by paying rent up front, large deposits, those things. Here's our key box authorization by tenant. The owner of the above referenced property has listed property for sale or lease. The owner has authorized the broker to place a key box on the property. A key box is a locked container placed on the property that holds a key. It's that same verbiage. And then it says the undersigned tenant authorized broker to place the key box on the property. Special provisions. This would be reserved for if the tenant says, you know, I have sick children, or, you know, I can only show the house a certain amount of time. And that's where you would just put that in there. It says the owner and broker advise the tenant to remove secure jewelry, prescription drugs, and other valuables. And this is where we have the tenant go ahead and sign. If I meeting the tenant, I use this to go ahead and introduce myself to the tenant. I ask the landlord for the tenant's information. I call the tenant myself, say, can I come over and sit with you and meet with you? And I sit down with the tenant and I explain to them the sales process, because just like the homeowner who's living in a home needs to know, the tenant needs to know. And I really try to assure them that, you know, we put electronic lockbox on, and I'll try to make sure that they get notified of the times and those things. So again, you have to work with them like they're the owner of the property and make sure they're comfy and they feel safe and secure that things are going to be done properly and until they can get out. I also offer my services. Can I help you find another place to rent? Can I help you buy something? Maybe they can't afford to buy this house. Maybe I can help them buy something else. So I'm going to offer to help them rent something else or buy something else. So that's a great, great way to try to get another client and help them. Extension of a residential lease. We do have an extension of a residential lease. Just know that it's there if you need it. And I have the buyer's temporary residential lease and the seller's temporary residential lease included in this class. These come into effect in the buying and selling. But I wanted to cover it because it's very different than the lease that we just went over. And most realtors don't understand the difference. The buyer's temporary residential lease is only when the buyer occupies the property for no more than 90 days prior to closing. So this is a document only good for 90 days. So if they're closing in July, they can move in May, June, July. So the term is, you put in the day they're going to move in, and it terminates as specified in paragraph 18. What's paragraph 18 of the 1 to 4 family? That's your closing date. The rent that can be charged. 2 ways. It could be the market rate or just what's going to cover the monthly nut of the homeowner. Since this is just a temporary thing, so they can decide on what they want to charge and pay. There should always be a deposit. Utilities, in this case, the tenant is going to switch the utilities onto their name because they're moving in. And then when it closes, they don't have to change it again, right? So this is a situation where the tenant will put everything in their name. I want to talk about this paragraph 14, because this is what makes this very different than the other lease. And the other lease, the landlord's responsible for repairs, right? The tenant is responsible for maintenance. In this, it says, except as otherwise provided in this lease, tenant shall bear all expense of repairing, replacing, and maintaining the property, including but not limited to the yard, trees, shrubs, and all equipment and appliances, unless otherwise required by Texas Property Code. Tenant shall promptly repair at tenant's expense any damage to the property caused directly or indirectly by any act or omission of the tenant or any other person than the landlord. That's very different, right? And that's because the property is for sale. There's a holdover fee. You can charge whatever, $100 is pretty typical. We try to make this a little steep because the only way this would be held over is if we don't close on time, right? And we have to extend the closing. Or we find out that they're not going to close, the deal's going to bust out, and we need to get them out. Is a buyer's temporary lease popular? No. If I'm the listing agent and the buyer's asking this because this is part of the offer, we really don't want to recommend this because the deal can bust out and then we're stuck with tenants in the property. So it's really not a popular thing. If it's something where it's just going to be a few days early, that's understandable. And that's okay, because by that point, the deal's probably a done deal. But to do this 2-3 months ahead of time, I don't know if that makes sense. Seller's temporary residential lease, this is very popular and this is widely used. And this is, remember, again, this is just like the buyer. This is only good for 90 days. See up top, for use only when the seller occupies the property for no more than 90 days after closing. And then this starts upon the funding. Again, the rate is something that the two of them just discuss. It's either market rate or their monthly nut. It should always be a deposit, $500, $1,000. And pets, we don't, it's whatever pets they have at the time. We're not gonna really just, that's kind of irrelevant. But again, this is important because they are still responsible for all the repairs and the maintenance of the property. This was a very big issue when we had the freeze and we had sellers who stayed in the property after, right? Maybe they were in there for 2 or 3 weeks waiting to close on something else. We had a freeze and then they didn't do the repair. We had a couple, we had somebody in there that thought, well, I don't own the house anymore. I'm just a tenant now. Wrong. You were responsible for the maintenance of that property and take care of all that stuff.
But this company is not like done right.
But he was responsible for getting it winterized and making sure everything was going to be okay. This was pool equipment, so he should have got it winterized. He should have took care of things. So he was responsible for the repairs. Plus, it's his house. Really, he lived in it for a certain amount. You should know your house, right? And do every due diligence to take care of it for the buyer. This talks about insurances. Insurances are really important, whether you own a home or it's up for rental. All those things have to be changed out. So you want to notify your insurance carrier. And I think we are done. We got through the last one, which was a seller's temporary residential lease. Woo, 12-12, we got that all done. So any questions? You all look like, ah. It's, I do a lot of talking, so I'll have to sort throughout the rest of the day. But I hope you got, I don't cover all of the fields, but I kind of do make sure you guys have a good understanding of real life, what all of this, means. Monica, you have a question.
On that last one where you're talking about the seller and the buyer's temporary lease, and you put in a security deposit, the security deposit should match whatever the rental, what the agreed amount rent is, right?
Not necessarily. When we're doing a temporary residential lease, we're it's usually about $35 to $50 a day. Remember, this is just for a few days. Typically, these seller's temporary residential lease is 3 to 4 days. Typically, we usually do this to bridge the time where they close on one and they can close on the next one. And so, sorry. I thought that's kind of cool. Look, there's everybody. Hey! So, but that was fun. So typically we put in we put it like $35, $50 a day is going to go in there, and then we charge $500 deposit. So it's very different than the other lease. And that $500 deposit is just to cover damage from move out. Typically what we see in disputes and conflicts is the moving company scratches up the wood floors. And those, that's usually the biggest thing that we see as a problem. So it's the wood floors during move out.
Okay, thank you.
Jason, you have a question?
Hey, Karen, thanks. When representing the landlord on a lease, I've had the occasion where I've had many applicants come in. How do you handle those? Do you handle like the 1 to 4 list on residential where you just collect them all and then present them, or what's the best way?
It's handled a little differently. So the landlord has 7 days Texas property code gives the landlord 7 days to make a decision. So unfortunately, that's not good news for the tenant, has to wait around that long, but he is given 7 days. And so, and that's because sometimes it takes a long time to get the criminal checks back and all of those things. So he can take his time, but you want to at the same time do what's right for all parties. So I think it's your job to usher the landlord along and say, hey, we can't really keep people hanging, right? So I think as soon as one comes in, run it through Smart Move. Either they're
Right.
good or they're not. If not, go on to the next one and just let the other ones go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Because remember, these people need housing, right? So it's not really fair to keep them hanging. So I'd say, tell your landlord to get through them as quickly as possible. Great question. Monica, do you have another question?
No, that was my question. I don't think you took my hand down.
Yeah, I got it. Uh-huh. The question is, what is the insurance the tenants need to have? So on a regular lease, a normal lease, they're going to have renter's insurance. It just covers the contents of their stuff in the home. When they're doing a temporary lease, for a few days, they probably should call their carrier, but that's why it's also good for 90 days, because the lender is aware that there's a temporary lease in play. And so the normal hazard insurance that the buyer gets when they purchase should cover everything. And that's why we only make those short term. But again, they need to verify on those temporary leases, is that the case? But most insurance carriers will honor on a temporary lease just a window on those 90 days. After that, you have to get either renter's insurance, or as the owner, you have to change it from owner's insurance to I'm now a landlord and have tenants in there. They always need to verify, but that's why we have these short term for only 90 days. Also, when a lender gives a loan, the borrower is certified in those loan documents that their primary, this is their primary residence, their primary owners. And so that too is why a lender will only allow that for 90 days, because you said you're going to be a primary owner, of a property. So, so there's a lot of factors why that 90 days comes into play, insurance and for the lender. So. Yeah, go ahead. The Smart Move. So this, the question was, she always sees the Smart Move handled by the representative of the tenant. So yeah, the landlord should set up the Smart Move account. He has to set it up because he's the one that's going to dictate the type of reports that the tenant must pay for. Yeah, the listing agent. The listing agent represents the landlord.
So yeah, so you can do it. The listing agent in favor of
The landlord should set it up, not the listing agent. But if the listing agent wants to do it on behalf of the landlord, I mean, because it asks a lot of questions that's really privy to the landlord. So I would suggest that a landlord sets all that up. And here's the other reason why. You don't want to be checking off the wrong box or requesting something and you get blamed for, not getting the right information or not ordering the right information. And then plus fair housing issues. You're a professional licensee, So anything that has to do with fair housing, you want to be arm's distance length. So that's really a job of the landlord. That's his job to do. Your job is to educate him that this is available to him and the reasons why he wants to use it. Mm-hmm. Oh. Oh. Well, it's a business decision you can make to choose, but it's really something created and geared for the landlord property owner. No, because then, yeah, because when the buyer goes on there and orders everything, then it's between the two of them. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So in this way, you can get reports from, right? The landlord can choose.
The reports will go to the landlord and the reports will go to the tenant. You should not be getting the reports regardless. You guys should never be looking at somebody's credit report, somebody's criminal history. That is something that you should not be doing at all. That's confidential, proprietary information, and it's of no use to you. You should have no part in any of this decision-making process.
And if you in the other side, if the tenant asks you like, I don't know, like my, how much is my, if I have any concern or not, or something happened, but I want to report it, can you run it for me? So if that is.
You can direct them to My Smart Move. I think as a tenant or a regular consumer, you can go on there and get the reports yourself. There's also as a regular human being, you can get free credit report. There's free Credit Karma, I think, all kinds of stuff that you can run your own credit and all of that. Yeah, that's a responsibility they need to bear the burden of.
My landlord, he said that that's message, and still have it,
Mhm.
do other things, because I don't know, I'm fine,
Mhm.
take care of me living. So
Mm.
I was the one who set up the smart move and everything, because that's what he wants.
So you want like hands off.
He does, yeah. She's like, I don't know how to do it. Just go ahead and do it.
Yeah. So there's kind of a couple issues, because one, you're not allowed to practice property management, right? Two, your E&O insurance is not going to cover you. And so you're doing something outside your licensure that you're not covered for. So I'd be careful on doing that. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe down the road, you might want to go ahead and refer him to somebody that handles property management.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about smart
Mhm.
move.
That's runs along the same lines. If you're setting up tenant criteria and you're running credit reports, that falls under property management. Yep. So it's not part of your licensure. So if you get filed a complaint, the TREC can suspend your license and